Please help me thank the Director of Latin American Studies, Dr. Victoria Garrett, the Associate Provost for International Academic Affairs, Michael Lastinger, and our very own Dean, Joyce McConnell, for supporting Mexico Week here at WVU Law. As I said, Mexico Week is part of Archibald Mcdougal Lecture Series on International Law. Archibald Mcdougal was born on August 5, 1903, in Hobart, Tasmania, the son of Professor Archibald McDougal, actually Dougal is a very, very common Scottish name, so this is Dougal, son of Dougal, but anyway. But Dougal McDougal, a former professor of law and modern history at the University of Tasmania. The younger McDougall earned his bachelor's and law degrees from the University of Tasmania and became Tasmania's Rhodes Scholar in 1924. As a Rhodes Scholar, he matriculated at Balliol College, Oxford University, where he received a Master's of Law and Bachelor of Civil Law, and then became barrister. McDougall was a member of the Honorable Society of the Middle Temple, which is one of the 4 Inns of Court exclusively entitled to call their members to the English bar barristers. The Inns of Court are the 4 professional associations for barristers in England and Wales, which have supervisory and disciplinary functions over their members, much like our bar associations have over our attorneys. For most of his career, McDougall was active in diplomatic affairs. He was a representative to the United States Senate Legislative Council Office. He was a legal advisor to the Minister of Foreign Affairs and a law professor in Iraq. He was a delegate to the League of Nations. He represented British interests in America during World War II. After the war, he was a legal advisor at the British Embassy in Egypt and the British Foreign Affairs Office. In 1940, McDougall was given shore leave to enter the United States in California. The passenger list listed McDougall as an English citizen of Scottish descent and a barrister. His visa was issued in Melbourne, Australia, but his permanent residence is listed as Baghdad, Iraq. He arrived in San Francisco on September 11, 1940. At this time, he was already married to American Corinne Cunningham. McDougall went on to receive an American legal education from Columbia University. In 1952, he moved to Berkeley County from Washington, D.C. A well-known attorney in the area, he was president of the Berkeley County Bar Association, and he was also a member of the West Virginia State Bar and the American Bar Association. He was also admitted to the United States Supreme Court Bar. Archibald Mcdougal passed away on January 14, 1984, in Gerardstown, did I pronounce that right? Gerardstown, Berkeley, West Virginia. He was buried in Kew, Victoria, Australia. In 1986, the estate of Archibald Mcdougal funded the Archibald Mcdougal Visiting Lectureship in International Law to increase student exposure to international law through visiting lectureship. Mr. Mcdougal wished to honor his old and revered friends Philip C. Jessup and Francis Deek. As many of you probably know, Philip Jessup served as a professor in international law at Columbia University, where in 1946 he was named the Hamilton Fish Professor of International Law and Diplomacy. Jessup held the post until 1961. From 1961 to 70, Professor Jessup served as a judge on the International Court of Justice. The Philip C. Jessup International Law Moot Court competition is named for Jessup, and this is the kind of company that McDougall kept. Today, the Archibald Mcdougal Visiting Lecture Series on International Law evidences the College of Law's continuing commitment to its programs in international law that explore diverse points of view on issues critical to the global legal community. Let me now introduce the faculty member who is responsible for doing most of the work putting this series together. That is, with many of the invisible workers such as Margaret O'Bouche and others who are listed on this that we thank also for the staff's help. Professor James Freeberg is the Hale J. and Roscoe P. Poston Professor of Law. A native Philadelphian, he was educated at Temple University before receiving his J.D. from Harvard University. His credentials are many. They include his serving as a Fulbright Scholar at Cambridge University, serving as a visiting professor at Pitt and the University of Hawaii, and a recipient of the Outstanding Law Faculty Scholarship Award just last year or 2 years ago. He started the Immigration and Human Rights Clinic here at the law school over a decade ago, probably closer to 2 decades ago. Professor Friedberg is a world-renowned international law scholar and teacher who has single-handedly for many years run the law school's international law program. It is his relationship with faculty at the University of Guanajuato that has created the Mexico Week that we can have today. It is that relationship that he has built over having summers abroad with students in Mexico. And we will also be doing that, and Professor Friedberg will be running that again this summer. And if you are interested in that, you should attend the meeting on Thursday with Professor Martin at 1 p.m. in the Davis Gallery. But please, for now, help me welcome your moderator of today's lecture, Jim Friedberg.
I paid her. One small correction. I'm not really running the summer program in May in Guanajuato. It's really Greg Bowman and Jenna Martin. You hear that, Greg and Jenna? I'm getting too old for that kind of thing. I will be there, but I'm going to watch Greg and Jenna do all the work. Patricia Begné should have the status here of an honorary professor. While she is a formal professor at the University of Guanajuato, she has been a professor for our law school many, many times. She has twice been the month-long distinguished McDougall professor, teaching a course here in 2001 and again in 2007, I believe. She has been here for these kinds of short visits, as she's here with her 2 other colleagues, Professors Rodriguez and Patron, 2 or 3 other times. Plus, on 3 occasions, she has been on our Guanajuato faculty when we have taken a couple dozen lucky students to that beautiful city, which you can see on the slideshow above the ATM in the lobby. I forget where that sentence began, but she's been there. An example of how helpful she's been to that summer trip was that the first time I made a preliminary visit for our summer trip in order to make arrangements for professors, for hotel rooms, for classrooms, for transportation, for field trips, etc. We got an original quote for transportation without any meeting or anything from the University of Guanajuato's transportation department for something like $2,000. Well, Patricia is the friend of the jefe of de transportes, which you might guess means chief of transportation, at the university, took me for a face-to-face meeting, and the budget line was reduced to about $750, which we could afford. And I think it's because of the power that she exudes when she is in the hallways in Guanajuato. Notwithstanding that kind of power, she is a person that has long been concerned with the rights of others. Perhaps that's partly because she was one of the first women law professors in Mexico. She became a professor of law when it was quite unusual and quite difficult for women to break into the legal field generally, but particularly into the stodgy, male-dominated citadel of teaching law in Mexico. I know because of the present faculty members we have here, you can't imagine the word stodgy being connected to professor, but believe me, it used to be. Finally, she has a very close relationship with my family that I find, and friends that I find very meaningful for me. I met her because our former very, very dear friend and dean, Carl Selinger, had initially made contact with Patricia on an Inter-American Lawyers Association. I think at the time she was the head of the Human Rights Committee at that association, and Carl Salinger was very, very active in human rights generally and inter-American human rights specifically. And because of his friendship, I gained a friend. And in the numerous trips that I and my wife and my daughter have had to Guanajuato, to the university, it has been more meaningful for us because we have had that wonderful friend there. And it was warm like being in Morgantown. So it is with both pride and warmth that I welcome Patricia Begné to give the McDougall Lecture.
Thank you, Jim, for this kind presentation, and thank you, all of you, for being here with us. And when I entered this room, I remember my first visit to West Virginia College of Law, and it was in this room, by the way, and Professor Carl Salinger introduced me to give a talk and to be here. So it is because of him that we are here, and he made this possible for you and me and for many, many more years to come. I wish this program continues for many more years. Okay, I don't want to bore you with some legal issues because the name of the presentation is the Mexican legal system. I think I can change a little bit this because my purpose in this talk is to share with you some thoughts about general concepts in order to understand our legal system. And I hope it's clear, please. I am not very comfortable in this situation, but let me see. I mean, I like to walk and... Can you hear me, I guess? We'll try. Well, no, I don't think so. We need a microphone. Okay.
We'll get you a mic.
Oh, thank you. Oh, I see. Okay. Well, I will start with these two paragraphs. You can see. Thank you. I will start with these two paragraphs of this book, and says, probably nowhere in the world do two countries as different as Mexico and the United States live side by side. More than levels of development, the two countries are separated by language, religion, race, philosophy, and history. This was taken from the book Distant Neighbors. This book was a bestseller in Mexico. In Mexico. It was very popular, very well known, and the author is Alan Riding in 1989. It was a portrait of the Mexicans. For the United States, understanding Mexico, its distant neighbor, has become a matter of self-interest and national security. The United States must learn to look beyond the surface of an ancient, complex, and unpredictable nation. That's Mexico, unpredictable nation. Here, this is our country, and the state of Guanajuato, where I come from, is exactly in the middle part of the center of the country, the state of Guanajuato. So I want to talk a little bit about the culture and about the cultural contrast, because they influence how people from different countries see the world. We have to ask, what is culture? More than many definitions of cultures are analyzed by many other authors, but one definition is an integrated system of learned behavior patterns that are characteristic of the members of any given society. So what are the elements of culture? Religion, social structure, language, education, political philosophy, economic philosophy. All these are the components of the elements of the culture. We have here an experiment made by the University of Michigan, who conducted an experiment of students from Asia and America. And when both groups were shown a photograph of, and their eye movements were tracked, researchers found substantial difference in how they literally are seeing the world differently. So cultural contrast influence how people from different countries see the world. That's what I want to make clear. For instance, foreign language and culture challenges, because I want to make emphasis in the culture and how it influences the legal system, any legal system. For instance, the need for language fluency, corporate versus academic perception. The need for a cultural fluency, the appropriate mix of language and culture. Survival skills versus language fluency as a target goal. Some general rules for doing business across cultures. Be prepared, slow down, establish trust, understand the importance of language, respect culture, understand the components of culture. Here we are. This is our country, Mexico, and the state of Guanajuato, where I came from, is exactly at the central part of the country. Let me see if I can do something else. Yeah, please. To close this and to go to the number 2. I have different presentation, and I hope and apologize because sometimes I'm not very good doing this, because you know this high tech, and we are not getting along very well. So the number 2. The number 2 is this. The number 2. Okay. The importance of understanding the legal culture of Mexico. I'm fine. I hope. Practicing law is the number 2, right? Because it is practicing law in Mexico. Well, I don't know what I try to say this here, but we have some topics that we have, or some elements or important facts. For instance, we have municipalities with indigenous majorities. We have to own property rights, the freedom of expression, and of course challenging state court opinions, and absolutely the role of international law. We have some exceptions for the foreigners who want to go to do business in Mexico. For instance, foreign people generally have the same civil, social, and human rights as Mexicans. Some exceptions. They have no right to petition political matters. They have no freedom to associate or assemble to criticize Mexican law. They cannot have titles of mobility or inherited honors, and restrictions in acquiring land in Mexico. These are the general rules for foreigners coming to Mexico. We have here business and legal culture in Mexico. Practicing, well, this is, here's what I want to go. What do you think? I think probably you are thinking that this is not very well organized, this talk. But I want to make emphasis, I want to make emphasis in some general aspects that are important to me, and I hope and I want to share with you. What do you think are the key elements for a successful, a strong community, a strong society? What elements are relevant to make a developed country? And what is the difference between a developed country and a developing country? In other words, United States versus Mexico. What are they? That's the question. Are you thinking in this? What elements are important? Education, economy, politics, health issues. What are the elements important? Elements to build a nation. As you can see, I need to do the key. How do you say the key, the arrow? How do you say la flecha o la? I don't know how to do this, but okay. So what are the elements to build a nation? And I take this from an Italian author who I like very much, and of course I agree with him in order to understand this concept. What are the elements in order to build a nation? Naturals, I mean geographically, historical, psychological. What are they? Naturals. Territory, race, language. The historical component, religion, customs, traditions, They are so important in some countries. For instance, in Mexico, there are really important traditions and customs, the rule of law, and psychological identity, the national, what I call national conscience. This is taken from Mancini, an Italian author, and I agree absolutely with him. That's why I love to show this to my students. And the purpose of this and the main purpose of this is to think about, because you are living in a developed country. And we are in Mexico, it's a different totally country. That's what I want to make emphasis on this concept. What is the concept of nation? Keeping in mind all what I said previously. What's the concept of nation? Here you have the desire to stay together and face common goals. That's it. Not the past, the future. That's what Juan Jacobo Rousseau says. The future is what makes a nation be, not its past. And in Mexico, we are always saying and remembering and thinking about the past, about our historical past. So the key question is, what is the difference between a developed country and a developing country? What is? What do you think? And that's when I want to know your opinions, because I am interested in your opinions. I came here in order to learn from you. That's what I want to say to you. I want to learn from you, especially from the young people, from the students. That's why I'm here. Do you have any ideas? What's the difference after I said all this? One of you, some volunteer? Any? Yeah? Jenna?
I was going to say, when you talk about physical, do you think that there's a role in terms of the difference in development natural resources?
Natural resources is another element. I mean, in Mexico we have natural resources, of course, very, yeah, it is. It's part of that. One of the.
So there's a concept that a lot of my students talk about that is the resource curse, which is, it plays out in that oftentimes countries that have the richest natural resources oftentimes have the strongest struggle with developing.
With development.
And I was wondering if you see that playing out in Mexico in terms of how your resources are, and if you think that's true.
But you know what? I am going to give you an example of your question, because in Mexico, in my country, we have the state of Chiapas, and Chiapas has many natural resources. But on the other hand, at the same time, they are the poorest state, the poorest region in my country. So it's not a key. Maybe we can finish the presentation and later we can do all these questions, yeah? But before, I wanted to share with you this, what is the key, what is the difference between a developed country and a developing country? That's the attitude of the people is the difference. Not the natural resources, not the things like that, economy, politics, health. No, it's the attitude of the people. In my opinion, of course, this is my opinion. And when studying the conduct of the people in the rich countries, it's discovered that most of the population follows these rules. Moral, like basic principle. Order and cleaning, honesty, punctuality, responsibility, respect to the rule of law, respect to the rights of others, love to work, and desire to save and invest. What do you think? Am I right? So do we need more laws in Mexico? No, we don't. It would be sufficient with fulfilling and making fulfill these 10 simple rules. We are not a non-developed country because our country needs natural wealth or because the nature has been cruel with us. No. Simply needs character to fulfill these premises basic of operation of the societies. So Mexico needs character to fulfill these premises basic of operation of the societies. That's what we need, in my opinion, of course. I think this is the next presentation. I think so. Let me see, yeah. And now, number 3, please. I'm not very good doing this. Number 3, yeah, please. Yes. I hope so. Yeah, Mexico is a part of the civil law tradition. We are trying to approach to the civil law tradition, which is the basic of the Mexican legal system. Mexico is part of the civil law tradition. Okay. Oh, this is very slow. Okay, legal tradition, civil law, common law, social law. Of course, you are in the common law system, we are in the civilian tradition, in the civil law system. The civil law tradition comes from the Roman law, the canon law, the commercial law, influence the development of the civilian tradition. This is very low. The oldest, most widely distributed and influential legal tradition is the civil law tradition. Roman law is often said to be the greatest contribution that Rome made to the Western civilization. We come from there. Civil law is based on Roman law and has influenced the law of persons, family, inheritance, property rights, etc. Canon law has influenced criminal law and law of procedures. And medieval commercial law influenced the commercial codes. By the way, our commercial code is from 1934 until the current. 1934, yeah. It's very old, yeah. So also the natural law influenced all the public law. To learn the Mexican legal system should begin with a reading of Mexican history. Historical events have forged every aspect of Mexican law. In these days, Mexico has experienced a legal evolution in the last 25 years. And we have had some changes at all levels, but mainly at the political and economical level. The history of Mexican law. Here is the historical part. Maybe we can go faster in this part, but anyway, I want to present you the pre-colonial period, indigenous law, the colonial period, independent, revolutionary period after our revolution in 1910, and the institutional period coming from 1917. Colonial period, okay, well, let me see if we can go fast, because this is the colonial period. The main laws was called Recopilación de Indias, and you can see the dates here. Very, very old, but very important document. And also we have the great influence from the Spanish people coming to Mexico, and we were under them, the Spanish people, for more than 300 years. And of course, the Spanish people and the Spanish legal system was imposed over the territory of the New Spain. And of course, some of the customs of the indigenous people survived. However, the Spanish people imposed in the name of the king, and that's it, the Spanish invasion. We have here the Aztec civilization, and of course they were very important in those years, the Aztec Empire, also the Mayas maybe, and the Aztecs were the inheritors of the cultures and traditions. Here, the Aztec Empire was based on the tribes, in particular the Mexicas in the Valley of Mexico. We can skip some of this historical background. Here we have the capital of the Mexican kingdom, was Tenochtitlan. It's a city built close to the Lake of Texcoco. That means very close to Mexico City. And Tenochtitlan was supported by the agricultural production in the Valley of Mexico. It was very important in the Mexican history. The Aztec society was highly stratified. I don't know why this presentation is like this, but I have to click. Okay. But here's something important. The leader of any group was well known as Tlatoani, and that means very powerful man, the Tlatoani. This word comes from the Aztec, the Tlatoani. The Aztecs had a judicial system, of course, and also the Aztec criminal law was very harsh. Death penalty, they had death penalty and was common. Okay, anyway, the Conquista from Spain tried to impose the political structure, religion, and a system of laws that came directly from Spain. Meanwhile, the Byzantine Empire brought to Spain the Justinian codification of Roman law. Justinian was an emperor. It has had a profound influence on the development of private law in Spain and other countries. Here we have, under the civil law tradition, Roman law serves as an important foundation for the form of deductive reasoning employed by lawyers, academics, and judges, drawing conclusions from general principles. Law developed very differently in Europe. The legal unity was not achieved there until the 19th century. And the revival of Roman law resulted in the fact that the legal study in the European universities became more concerned with the systematization and coherence of the legal order than with the outcome of particular legal disputes. The emphasis in this structure could only have been achieved through codification. And by the 19th century, Europe was ready for national legal unity. And the code, the código, would provide solution to all problems in a particular area, became the primary instrument to achieve such unity. To a common law lawyer, the civil law seems to be rigid, inflexible rules operated by a judge. And to a civil law lawyer, the common law appears to be an unorganized collection of judicial decisions that can be interpreted by judges in very different ways, sometimes broadly, sometimes very narrowly, sometimes literally, etc. This difference in the technique of legal analysis is often the cause of great misunderstanding between civil law and common law lawyers. So we are approaching to the subject, just little by little. The number 4.
Number 4?
Yeah. Please. Okay.
Okay.
Basic information for practicing law in Mexico. What would you want to know if you were to practice law in another country? Type of government, the official language, the appropriate attire, the business practices, greetings, for instance, how to do greeting in the business world, and other interesting information. In the case of Mexico, we have the type of government is a federal republic. We have 2 chambers, the Senate and the Chamber of Deputies. The official language is Spanish, of course. The appropriate attire is business attire, and our casual attire is business attire. And the business practices, the punctuality, here we make a parenthesis because we have our own rules. We are very flexible with the time, and some other considerations. How to address Mexicans. And other interesting information. For instance, 90% of the Mexicans are Roman Catholics. I wonder if these days this is true, totally true. I don't think so. And the currency, for instance, the Mexican peso is the equivalent of 13 pesos approximately for $1. And also the NAFTA agreement between Canada, the United States, and in Mexico. To talk about NAFTA is a complex issue. But I have my special and particular opinion about NAFTA agreement, but maybe other day. What do you want to know about the government in Mexico in order to practice law effectively? What are the fundamental principles governing Mexican law? In the Mexican legal system, general principles of law are the foundation of the entire legal system. What are the general principles of law? Legality, quality, security. What are your concerns so far with practicing law in Mexico? Some questions to consider. How stable is the Mexican government? One of them. Does Mexico obey the rule of law? And what is the rule of law? I know that I am making these questions to experts in law, but I want to hear you and to listen to your opinion. What is the definition of the rule of law? The doctrine that all people are equal before the law and that the government is subject to the law, or the absence of arbitrary executive power? What do you think? What is the rule of law? Legal environment in which civil cases and criminal cases are handled in non-arbitrary manner according to a well-developed and well-understood body of law. Does Mexico follow the rule of law? That's the question. Some factors to determine whether a country follows the rule of law. Separation of powers. Separation between church and state. The judicial independence. Peaceful transactions between administration change. Maybe some of these facts are not very common for you, but let me tell you that in my country there are important facts. Is there a constitution in use? Is there an ethical code for attorneys? Factors to become a notary public and government attorney, that's totally different than your system, than in my system in Mexico. Can you bring a claim against the government and its officials? Can you do that? Are trials fair? Are elections free and fair? All these questions we have to know to say if the country follows the rule of law. What do you think? And how can we do it in order to improve the rule of law? In my opinion, is the constitutional balance of power in Mexico. A balance between the powers is a must. They need to have total independence from the executive, the judicial, and the legislative. And also, we are working in this moment, in these years, in order to perform oral trials. We are in the transition from our system to the oral system. And believe me, it's not easy. It's not easy to do that. Here you have how the laws are well maintained. I mean, what do we have at the top level? We have the Mexican Constitution. In second place, we have the federal laws, the codes, and the treaties. And finally, the state laws. What that means, the custom, the general principles of law, etc. Here you have all I mentioned this before. Generally have the same civil, the foreign, I mentioned this before. That is a general principle, that no individual stands above the law and that all rulers are answerable to the law. This is one of the major legacies of the constitutional system. And we have another sources of law in Mexico, the administrative rulings, the administrative agreements, the circulars, and the executive agreements. So what do we need to, in order to practice law in Mexico? The bar admission, of course. And then we have a license to practice as public notary. Public notary has a very different function than you have here in the U.S. To be public notary, you have to be a lawyer first. to get the admission, bar admission, and then another kind of graduate studies in order to get the license to be notary public. And that is not easy. And also we have the professional associations. Here you have the legal research method and sources of law in Mexico. The 3 steps in Mexican legal research are, first, to find the appropriate code. When I said code, it's código. The second is to find the relevant doctrina, I mean the books, the text. And number 3, to find, if it's necessary, the relevant jurisprudencia. Let me tell you that the word jurisprudencia, jurisprudence for you, is not have the same meaning that you have here. It's different. So probably sometimes we are confused with the terms and with the words. Here in these legal issues, it's not very easy to find the appropriate word or the right word, because dealing with legal terminology is a totally different issue. In what order should we consult the law in Mexico? First, the Constitution. Secondly, the Code. And the last one is the unwritten law. What is the general principles of law? And the last is the jurisprudence, jurisprudencia. Okay, the last one. Oh, it was missing one. No, it's okay. No, it's okay. The last one. Maybe your expectations were different because the Mexican legal system is not thing like this. But, I mean, I want to approach the general concepts in order to understand. Okay, thank you. Differences between the civil tradition and common law. Here. The difference between the judicial systems derive from our different colonial past and from the cultural. That's what I want to start with, the culture issue, and the social and political heritage given to us by our ancestors. Here one author, Arthur von Mehren, a leading authority in this field, suggests that the difference between the two traditions arose mainly because of 2 events years ago. The conquest of England first, and then the beginning in many European universities of legal education. And law was developed in very different way in Europe, and they reached and achieved the legal unity until the 19th century. This emphasis on structure could only have been achieved through codification. And by the 19th century, Europe was ready for national legal unity. And the code, the código, would provide solutions to all problems in a particular area, became the primary instrument to achieve such unity. Probably for you it's very weird just to find the solution in a small book called Código. But for us, well, we will see this later. But the difference then between common law and civil law is this. The common law is mainly judge-made law, and the civil law is based on legislation. They are 2 very different ways to analyze legal problems. To a common law lawyer, the civil law seems to be very rigid, inflexible. To a civil law lawyer, the common law appears to be an organized collection of judicial decisions. I mentioned this previously. So, this difference in the technique is often the cause of this is duplicated, I'm sorry. But anyway, each legal system has a strength and weakness. For the business law, it's very important this, because if we are trying to translate word for word, can result in serious miscommunication. This is really important for people who are interested in business law. The role of language in international business. Why is it so important, the language? Because it's important mainly for the business transactions because mainly we have to do that. Provides access to local society, important in company communications. It extends beyond mechanics to the interpretations of context, more than simple word recognition. The legal dictionaries or interpreters do not replace the need to learn and understand the legal framework. It's also very important to understand the cultural context. That's what we have to keep in mind, the culture element. The common law system is based on the case law. And Mexico, of course, adopted the codification of law. But this is not a significant distinction between the two legal systems. It's not the only one difference or distinction. The differences are these. The civil law is based on codes and deductions of logic that have turned into concepts. And the common law is mainly a judge-made law. And I said previously the difference in this is it can cause great misunderstanding between the civil law and the common law lawyers. Here we have translating legal terminology. To translate legal terms requires an understanding of both the legal context in which the term is used and the legal context which the translation is intended. Bilingual lawyers, interpreters, and law professors have found that attempting to translate word for word can result in serious miscommunication. Now, this is duplicated, I'm sorry, I think. As you can see, I'm not good doing this. I mean, here we have. This is a very old book in the 19th, but was one of the first books about this, describing the business cultures in 60 countries. It was in 1994. This book tried to do that. And why is so important the role of language in international business? Here you have an example of advertisements. Is this in 1987? This is a very old advertisement introduction. Here, some elements to do business in Mexico. To do business in Mexico, the pace will tend to be slower than the U.S. That means that take time, so you need to be patient. And personal friendships, as Jim mentioned it before, are vital to do business in Mexico. And also is be warm and personal is another element. And in our country, there are extreme contrasts between rich and poor. And corruption is also more apparent than the USA. Here we have another books about this issue, this topic. For instance, manners are considered important. The clothing and the general appearance are considered important also. The time. And here you have a very good sentence. The Mexican works to live. The U.S. business person often lives to work. And that's true. Gerencial is management. Gerencia is management. Oh, wow. Yeah, cultura gerencial, that's management, cultural management, Mexico and United States. And again, we need to understand the cultural context. I think we should, these are duplicated. Here, one should remember that just because Mexican law is less voluminous and in some ways more manageable than U.S. law, does not mean that the outcome of the application is always predictable. For instance, for me, I was very impressed when my first visit to the law school here in the U.S., and I learned the students have, in the first year of the law school, have a special course in order to find out and to learn how to look the precedent in so many cases. For me, it's almost impossible to do that. How many cases you have to learn and to look and to find out in order to find the precedent? For me, it's impossible to do that. It's not very comprehensible. And for you, maybe you can understand how can we have the solution in a small book named Código, because the difference are there. I mean, we have two very different legal systems. That's what I wanted to explain. Now, in these days, the Mexican states are growing more independent from a traditional centralized Mexico in order to have the autonomy that we need. And learning about the Mexican legal system is some similarities with your system in the U.S. court structure. But, as I said, Mexican legal derives from the civil law tradition, but we have in these days some important improvements in the legislative accomplishments. And I want to finish with, at the beginning of my talk, the cultural contrast influence how people from different countries see the world. So probably we are not very incomprehensible to each other, but as I said at the beginning, we are neighbors and we have to learn from each other. And that's it. I think that's it. Yeah? We can close this. Now we have time, or we have some, yeah. So any comments are very, very welcome. No comments, well.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed your talk. One thing I thought about during the talk is sometimes in first-year law school, and we have a lot of first years in the audience today, first years have a lot of trouble in law school, and the earliest the so-called cloud is lifted would be about halfway through the semester of the first semester, maybe 7 or 8 weeks into the semester. But sometimes the cloud doesn't lift, and we're about there now, we're about halfway through the semester. But sometimes the cloud doesn't lift for 3 semesters, in the middle, really in the middle of the second year. And usually by the end of law school, everyone gets it, because it is so complicated. And it's really a system of inductive learning rather than deductive learning. And so I think one thing that I found encouraging about your talk was that perhaps the students who are having the most difficulty in first year actually would do really well in being a business person in the world, because perhaps it's because they can actually think more like the lawyer in a different country. So I just wanted to use that to encourage students not to give up and to realize that it is a very difficult way of thinking. It's something that obviously very esteemed professors in other countries also find very difficult, and that it's just a very complex legal system with strong historical roots.
Yeah, it is. It is. As you can see, it is not easy. It's not easy to try to explain, and I don't want to do and to show you this is the Mexican legal system, because it's impossible to understand. That's why I wanted to make emphasis in the other elements, culture and all the elements, as I show you in the slides, because for me it's important. Otherwise, it's incomprehensible to understand the legal system of each other.
Thank you so much for coming. I think a theme that kind of ran through your presentation was the cultural differences, and something that I picked up, and maybe you can expand upon a little bit, was you said that foreigners have virtually all the rights in Mexico, and then you had some exceptions. Mm-hmm. And one was you're not allowed to criticize the government or the law, and you can't own property into Americans, that's not like an exception. That is dramatically different in the way that we interpret. And I wonder if you can expand a little bit about, how things are changing within the system.
You are right. Maybe I should say to participate in legal issues and in legal topics. I mean, instead of criticize. Maybe the right word is to participate in these issues. Maybe instead of criticize. Because let me see if I can give you an example of this. Maybe you know and are familiar with Mario Vargas Llosa, who is a very famous writer. He's from Peru. I don't remember exactly what year, but he said, staying in Mexico, when he was in Mexico, he said, Mexico is the perfect dictatorship. México es la dictadura perfecta. Do you know why he said that? Because we have for more than 70 years the same political party in power, in office. We have government for the same political party for more than 70 years. So Mexico is the perfect dictatorship. It resembles like a dictatorship. So you know what happened with this writer? 12 hours later, he was in London. He flew the country because he was in Mexico and he said, criticized the government and he criticized the system. So I don't know how, but he was 12 hours later, he was in London. I know I'm not if this fits well in this kind of example. But maybe to participate instead of criticize, but you can do that as a foreigner.
I just wanted to follow up a little bit on Professor Reiser's question about the second part, not owning property, that there is restrictions on foreigners not being able to own property, because that is, we have a little bit of that in the States, but that's fairly unique. And we talk about that in some of the classes with the students, but I was wondering if you could elaborate on why, your understanding of why Mexico has that, because my understanding is things like foreigners are not allowed to own property near the border, and there are certain industries that foreigners are not allowed to own, or they're allowed to own but with restricted investments.
Yeah,
and I was wondering what the cultural or historical underpinnings were that brought that to be.
Yeah, I can say that, yes, we have some restriction in order for the foreign people cannot to buy or to have, to own properties in the border and in the beaches and the coast. 50 kilometers to the border and to the border, in the border and in the coast, they cannot own property. They have no property rights in the cases. And the other question apart is because we have to protect our national industry and our national, how do you say, industry? Yeah, and investment. So that's some restriction for the foreign people to have how many investment they can do in order to preserve the national, how do you say it, sovereignty? Sovereignty, yeah, sovereignty, that. And things like that. That is more than in the text than in the reality, you know that. But interesting, yeah.
Hi, thank you for speaking to us. I'm not really sure how to phrase this, but you were speaking of a book of rules that you refer to, the Codio, is that what you called it? It's like
The code, código, code,
Código.
the code.
My question is, in Mexico, what effect do judicial decisions have on changing law?
Judicial decisions affects the law?
I guess in America, when a judge makes a ruling, that can change the way the law works from that point forward. Does that happen in Mexico?
No, in Mexico we have, In Mexico, we have a different system. We have to have 5 different decisions in the same order in order to constitute the we call jurisprudence. But I said jurisprudences have not the same meaning that you have here in the U.S. It's different meaning. It's different concept. Jurisprudencia for us, that means that we have to have at least 5 cases in the same order, in the same way of solving problems in order to make jurisprudencia. And we can use that, not the other way.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks again for coming and for your talk. You mentioned in your presentation that a difference between a developing country and a developed country has to do with attitude. And I was wondering if you could elaborate on the type of attitude that you would see or that needs to change, maybe in Mexico or in other developing countries, to reach that state of development that you were speaking of.
Well, as I said, in the 10 elements, I said the moral, the honesty, punctuality, responsibility, the love to work, everything that I mentioned before. In my opinion, that means attitude of the people. Not the wealth, not the natural resources, not all those kind of things, not because we are of the same race, we speak the same language, we have the same historical background, but not of that. It's the attitude of the people, the desire to stay together. The Japanese people is totally a different example of that. They know exactly what is the national identity, how to feel about your country, what do you want to do for your country because you have a national identity, what I call national conscience, conciencia nacional in Spanish. For me, is the most important. And as I said, is looking to the future, not living by the past. And in Mexico, we used to do that. We are always living in the past. In my opinion, of course. Thank you. Yes.
Yes. I briefly remember you saying something about administrative agencies in your talk. You had your common law and your civil law. I was just wondering, like, in America, we have a lot of regulations that are promulgated by these agencies. I was wondering if you could compare and contrast the two systems. Like, is your agency actually have rulemaking, or is it just the enforcement of the law, or anything? It can be very general, it can be very specific. I don't know.
I understand your questions about if we have similarities.
Yeah. For administrative agencies in particular.
What do you mean by administrative agencies?
Like in America, we have, say, for instance, the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, where they will make rules.
We have something similar in Mexico, right, Fernando? Instead of something similar, we have this kind of agencies, he says. We have. But your question is if they have influence?
Are those agencies delegated to make their own rules below the legislature?
No, I don't think so.
Yeah, but that's pretty much it. It's it's kind of how does it lie in between the civil and the common law? For us would be the enforcement or the administrative branch and the legislative branch, or executive and legislative, and how does it fall in between there with Mexico?
Well, if I understand your question and your point is because we need more independence between the executive power independent to the judicial power. Is that correct, Fernando? If I understand? No? What is his question? Well, in theory, they are independent, of course, in theory. I'm not sure if I know the answer to your question, because in theory, they have to be independent, of course. For instance, I can recall the National Human Rights Commission, Comisión Nacional de Derechos Humanos, and things like that. They are independent, of course. They have to do that, and they have to be independent. At least in theory, they are. For instance, we have the, let me see what, I am in charge, let me give you a small example. I am in charge of the Ombudsman Office. The Ombuds Office, do you know what that means in the universities? The Ombuds Office is the office when you have a problem between professors or students and they go with you. Well, I am absolutely independent of the main building, of the main office of the university. I can do my own job with no any ties of any kind. So I am totally and absolutely independent doing my job.
Okay, but here, let's say in the United States, the legislature can make statutes, which would be very high up in how we would look at something. We would look at the Constitution, the statute, and then any interpretations by the courts. But we also created in the 1930s, and a little before that, but really the explosion was in the 1930s, agencies under the president. And they can take the law as Congress enacted it, and they can create more laws called regulations. And those are specific laws to flesh out what the law is at the congressionally enacted law. So they flesh it out. And those are administrative agencies creating regulations. You don't have any
we
of that.
don't have anything like that.
That's what I thought.
I understand. Thank you for the explanation. I couldn't understand previously. Thank you.
That connects a little bit to my question. Therefore, is that an example, not having written agency regulations, of the people that run agencies having more executive discretion and therefore maybe less rule of law? It seems that when you were talking about balance of power and the need for balance of power among the judiciary and executive and legislature, you were concerned, I think, that there is not enough balance today, and the executive is able to do too much, the legislature too little, and the judiciary too little. This would also extend to Ann's point and the student's point. If there aren't written regulations for the agencies, then the agency head can just determine what he or she wants every time.
No, maybe again, I need your help. Fernando, yes. Yeah, please come.
The agencies have written regulations. The thing is that...
This is our government expert, Professor Fernando Patron.
But they are not independent. They cannot create rules or laws by themselves. So everything has to go, well, through the executive or through Congress. You know? They have a specific written regulations, each one. You know? Environmental agencies, electoral agencies, human rights agencies. But everything has to be in the Constitution. And it has to be approved, well, passed by Congress. On their own, they cannot, well, put in effect, exercise, or apply any other law by themselves. No, that's the difference. No? Yes, absolutely. And they are more limited. I mean, these agencies that you were talking about, for instance, probably one of them could be the CIA as well, no? FBI, probably. Probably I'm not giving the right examples, no? But other kind of agencies.
They don't really write laws.
No. But they are independent, right? They can enforce some other laws.
They would enforce other laws, right?
That's it. In Mexico, these agencies that we do have them, they cannot. No, only what is written in the Constitution and, well, their own limits, right? That's the thing. No? So.
Thank you for your help, Fernando.
Thank you very
We are done. Okay. Thank you.